The rain hadn't yet started falling, but the sky above King's Landing rumbled with the promise of a storm. Ned Stark stood in the cold chambers of the Tower of the Hand, alone, brooding over a truth he never asked to know. Jon Arryn's death had been just the beginning. The whispers, the clues, the book of royal lineages, it all led him here. Joffrey Baratheon was not Robert's son. None of them were. Cersei Lannister had lied, defiled the throne with her incestuous children, and now sat smugly in the Red Keep, as if her very breath didn't poison the realm. He had given her a chance. He remembered it vividly. The quiet conversation in the godswood, the rustle of leaves, the way she smiled at his mercy like it was weakness. He warned her to flee, to take her children and leave, before Robert returned. But now Robert was dead, and Cersei had stayed. Ned's hand trembled as he drew his sword, Ice, the great sword of House Stark. It hadn't been swung in weeks. Now it felt heavier than ever, as if it knew what he was considering. Honor had guided him all his life. But what had honor brought him in this city of vipers? Varys had come to him that morning, voice low, eyes darting. "She will not flee, Lord Stark. She prepares to crown her son. The city watch is being bribed. Your mercy will be your doom." That was the moment something in Ned cracked. He sent a raven to Stannis. Not a letter of warning. No, that had been sent days ago. This one was colder. It named him heir. It swore fealty. It told him to march. Then, without telling his men, without trusting even Sir Barristan or the council, Ned Stark, dressed in black, and walked to the Queen's chambers, alone. The guards stood aside when he showed them his seal. They knew his face, and they knew nothing of what burned inside him. Cersei sat by the fire, sipping wine. She didn't rise. "Well," she said without turning, "come to offer more advice, Lord Stark? Or is this another warning?" He stood silently for a moment. Then he stepped forward, and she finally turned. There was something smug in her eyes, something that thought it had won. "It's over," she said softly. "You hesitated, and now your head will roll before your northern snows even reach the Crownlands." He could have tried to reason. He could have threatened her with exposure again. But he had done that. He had given her a chance to run. She chose to stay and take the throne. She chose to make a mockery of Robert's death. So he said just one word, "No." And then with one swing, ice cut the air in half. The scream didn't come. Her body fell before her mind could react. Her golden hair spread out across the stone floor like spilled wine. Her head, with its last smirk frozen in time, rolled to a stop by the fire. Ned didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He stood still as stone, staring at the thing he had done. Then chaos began. The screams of her maids, the stomp of guards' boots, blood pooling across the floor, sticky and thick. And Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, stained red. He didn't fight. He didn't flee. He knelt beside her headless body, waiting. When the King's Guard arrived, they didn't know what to do. Jaime wasn't there. He was still in the Riverlands. It was Ser Boros who entered first, sword drawn, face pale. And all Ned said was, she was a traitor to the realm. But traitor or not, the realm did not see it that way. By midday, the streets of King's Landing burned with rumors. The Northman killed the Queen. He murdered her in cold blood. It was treason. He wants the throne. Joffrey, 12 years old and shaking with rage, screamed that Ned should die. The city watch was split. Some loyal to gold, others unsure who even ruled now. Pycelle fainted. Littlefinger vanished. And deep in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep, Ned sat in a cold cell, ice taken from him, hands bound, knowing one thing with grim certainty: the realm would never be the same. The cell stank of mildew and old blood, and the air hung heavy with damp rot. Ned Stark sat on the cold stone floor, wrists raw from iron chains, head bowed, but not in defeat. It was the silence that gnawed at him most, silence from the world above, from the Red Keep, from his family. He had sent a message to Stannis, but there was no telling whether it reached him before the storm broke. No telling whether his daughters were still safe, and no telling how long Joffrey's vengeance would wait before demanding his head. They came for him on the third day. 2 guards, both young, neither able to look him in the eye. They didn't speak as they unchained him and dragged him up the winding stairs. Light stabbed at his eyes after so long in the dark, and when he blinked against it, he saw the throne room was full. Packed, more like it. Lords, knights, councilmen, Lannister bannermen with grim faces and stiff posture. Even Pycelle was here, though he looked half a corpse himself, leaning on his cane with both hands and trembling. On the Iron Throne sat Joffrey, too small for it, too proud to admit it. His legs dangled slightly, but his eyes burned with cold hatred. Cersei's death had changed him. The Child King was now something harder, more dangerous. Ned walked with dignity, even if each step echoed with doom. His hands were bound, but his spine was straight. "Lord Eddard Stark," Joffrey's voice rang out too loud for his frame, "you are charged with the murder of the Queen Regent, Her Grace Cersei Lannister, and high treason against the crown. How do you plead?" Murmurs filled the hall, whispers like knives. Some watched with horror, others with glee. Ned didn't look at the boy. His eyes went to Sansa, standing to the side, pale and shaking. She was dressed in Lannister red now, her Stark wolf nowhere to be seen. Her eyes were begging, silently pleading for him to say anything, anything, to save himself. And then Arya. She was nowhere to be seen. His chest tightened. "Where was Arya?" "I plead guilty," Ned said at last, his voice carrying through the hall like winter wind. "Guilty of striking down a traitor to the realm. Guilty of protecting the legacy of a true king. Guilty of doing what Robert Baratheon would have done had he lived another day." Gasps rang out. Joffrey's lips twitched, trying to form a scowl that looked more like a sneer. "You call my mother a traitor?" he hissed. "I call her what she was," Ned said. "Your Grace, your mother betrayed your father, lied to the realm, and seated you on a throne not rightfully yours." The room nearly exploded in outrage. Lords shouted. Knights drew half their swords before someone barked for order. But Joffrey was still, his voice calm, too calm. "Then I sentence you to die," he said. "Not like a lord, like a common criminal, stripped of titles, hung like a dog." Sansa collapsed, crying out. Pycelle muttered a prayer. Littlefinger, standing near the dais, just smiled faintly. But the hall doors slammed open, every eye turned. In marched Sir Barristan Selmy, armor-polished, white cloak flowing. Behind him a dozen men, northern guards. How they got in no one knew. And behind them all came Renly Baratheon, his jaw tight, eyes burning. "The realm is not yours to burn, boy," Renly said coldly. "You do not sit that throne by right. And you will not spill more blood while I breathe." Joffrey laughed. "You? You have no army." Renly smiled, but it was bitter. "Not yet. But I bring word. Stannis Baratheon sails from Dragonstone. He carries Ned Stark's seal and the truth of your birth. And there are many who would see the lion cub thrown from his stolen seat." Chaos erupted again. Guards shouted. Some hesitated. Some looked to the Kingsguard, confused, split, unsure it had begun. The blood hadn't spilled yet, but war had. And Ned Stark, still in chains, realized what he had done. By killing the Queen, he had lit the match. Now the realm would burn. Ned was dragged back to his cell, though now the guards seemed unsure of who their prisoner truly was. One of them, a younger man with a northern accent, tightened the chains with a little less malice. The other refused to meet his eyes. Outside, the city buzzed like a disturbed hive. Bells rang not in mourning but in warning. Ravens flew. Orders were shouted down alleys. Steel boots echoed on cobblestones. News travelled fast in King's Landing, especially when soaked in blood. Cersei Lannister, daughter of Tywin, Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, was dead, murdered by the Lord of Winterfell. And now Stannis Baratheon sailed toward the capital with fire in his wake. It was Sansa who came to him that night. The cell door creaked open, and she slipped in, eyes red from crying. She carried a small cloak, one of his own from Winterfell, which she'd somehow saved. She draped it around his shoulders like she used to do when she was a little girl. "They say you're going to die," she whispered. Ned looked at her, and it struck him how grown she seemed now. Not a lady, not yet, but no longer a child either. "They've always said that," he murmured, "even when I was your age." "I begged the king to spare you," she said. He just laughed. "I know." He touched her cheek gently. "I saw your tears. That's all I needed, little bird." "I'm not a little bird anymore," she whispered. He nodded once, slowly. No, you're not. The cell door opened again. This time it was Varys, gliding in like a shadow with no weight. His face was unreadable. The city will tear itself apart within the week, he said. Stannis is close. Renly has fled the city, likely to gather forces of his own. The boy king is unstable, and Tywin Lannister rides from Harrenhal with fire in his eyes. Then let him ride, Ned said. I'll be dead before he arrives. Varys raised an eyebrow. Perhaps, or perhaps not. Ned frowned. Speak plainly, Spider. Not. Ned frowned. Speak plainly, Spider. Varys glanced at Sansa, then back at Ned. There is a ship at Blackwater Bay, slavers from Lys, but loyal to coin. You could be on it before dawn, Sansa gasped. You mean escape? I mean, Varys said smoothly, there is a small window in which your death can be postponed, your life bought with silence. You disappear, you let the lions claw each other to death, let the Baratheons drown in their pride, let the South rot. Ned stared at him. And my daughters? Sansa will remain. She is the Stark hostage, pardon noble guest, in King's Landing, Arya. We don't know, but I suspect she's still within the city. A ghost, a blade maybe. Ned clenched his fists. The idea of leaving them behind, of fleeing like a coward while his children remained in the claws of the crown, made his stomach twist. But he also knew something else. If he died, there would be no Stark voice left in the capital. No protector, just vengeance and fire. What would I owe you? Ned asked. Varys smiled without joy. Only your silence, and if I refuse. Varys shrugged. Then you'll die tomorrow, and the realm will descend into war regardless. But with your escape, you leave chaos without a martyr. Ned looked to Sansa. Her face was pleading. Father, please. And in that moment, he made the most un-Stark-like decision of his life. He chose to live. That night, dressed in a beggar's cloak and smelling of the sewers, Eddard Stark was smuggled through a hidden passage below the Red Keep. The ship was waiting, just as Varys had promised. But before he left, he looked back toward the Red Keep one last time. The tower lights flickered like fireflies in the night. Somewhere in that palace of secrets, his daughters were trapped. Somewhere in those stone walls, a false king played with power, and lions bled. He didn't run because he was afraid. He ran because the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ship from Lys creaked as it cut through the cold waters of Blackwater Bay, its sails black as shadow, its crew silent as ghosts. Ned stood at the stern, wind slapping against his face, watching King's Landing shrink behind him. The Red Keep was a distant silhouette now, a jagged crown rising over smoke-choked skies. It looked peaceful from afar, almost like a painting. But he knew better. Inside those walls, the real war had already begun. Below deck, he had nothing but a straw mattress and his own thoughts to keep him company. Thoughts of Sansa, alone among wolves. Of Arya, lost and dangerous. Of Robb, up north, likely marching south now, thinking his father was dead. And of Stannis, sailing straight into the lion's den. He couldn't stay on this ship forever. That much was clear. Varys might have saved his life, but the spider's webs always came with a price. Ned Stark wasn't meant for exile. He was meant to fight, to stand. And that meant returning, somehow. 3 nights into the voyage, he awoke to shouting, feet pounding the deck above, steel clashing. Pirates, Lannister ships? He burst out of the hold, sword drawn. Yes, they'd even smuggled him a blade, and looked into the chaos. A smaller vessel had drawn up beside them, ropes flung across the railings. Men with torches were climbing aboard, screaming in a language he didn't recognize. But they weren't pirates. No, these were sellswords, and they were looking for someone. They were looking for him. Ned didn't wait. He fought. The first attacker rushed him with a curved blade. But Ned ducked low, swept his legs, and drove steel into his chest. Blood sprayed the deck. Another came from behind. Ned twisted, catching the glint of steel just in time to parry. The clash rang in his bones. He didn't kill this one. He disarmed him and kicked him overboard. But the fight didn't last long. The Lyseni crew proved loyal, or maybe just feared their coin drying up. Either way, they fought back hard, and within minutes, the attackers were dead, dying or swimming back to their boat. Only one was captured. He was a boy, no older than Arya, trembling with a gashed shoulder. When Ned pressed the blade to his throat and asked who sent them, the answer came quick: a red priest. In Dragonstone. Said you were the false hand. Said your fire must be put out. Ned froze. Melisandre. He'd heard whispers of her, a woman with fire in her veins and a god on her lips. She served Stannis. But if she had sent assassins after him, what did that mean? Was Stannis not the ally he hoped for? The boy died from his wound before he could say more. That night, Ned stood alone on the bow of the ship and watched the stars. His plan had crumbled before it even began. If Stannis had turned to fire and prophecy, if he'd sent a red witch to silence him, then who in the seven hells could he trust? The answer, as always, came back to one name: Robb, his son, his heir, the only one who still bore the true honor of Winterfell. The next morning, he ordered the captain to turn the ship north. "To White Harbor," he said. "Take me home." The captain balked. That wasn't the deal. "You're to disappear." "I've disappeared long enough," Ned said, voice like stone. "Now I go where winter calls me." The ship changed course, north, toward home, but by the time they reached the shores near White Harbor, everything had changed. Smoke rose from the distance. War banners flew on the hillsides. The Bolton-flayed man, the Umber giant, the direwolf of Stark, all gathered in preparation. Northern banners, ready for blood. At the gates of White Harbor, a rider approached. He wore grey and black, his hair soaked in rain. Ned recognized him before he even spoke. "Robb sent me," the rider said. "He's already crossed the neck. He's headed for Riverrun." "Why?" Ned asked, heart pounding. "Because they took your head, my lord," the rider said softly. "They said they put it on a spike. In front of the sept." Ned felt the world tilt. The lie had been sealed. His death had become real, and the North had answered. The gods had a cruel sense of humor. To the realm, Eddard Stark was already dead, a traitor beheaded in front of the great sept of Baelor. Word had spread like wildfire. Songs were being sung in taverns. "The wolf who bit the queen," they called him. The lion banners waved prouder than ever, and even in White Harbor, people whispered in fear when they saw a man with Ned Stark's eyes walking freely. But he didn't hide. Not anymore. He rode under a hood, yes, but never far from the road, never in shadows. It wasn't time to skulk like a rat. It was time to bring winter back to the south. The Manderleys were the first to swear to him. Lord Wyman, wide and wheezing but sharp as a Valyrian blade when it mattered, knelt before Ned in a private chamber deep within White Harbor, and said words he never thought he'd say again. "My sword is yours, my lord, but your enemies think you're dead. We can use that." "We should use that." Ned nodded. "Then let them believe I'm a ghost." Within days, he was riding south with a small company of Manderley men at his back. Messengers rode ahead to warn Robb, not of his return, but of the war to come. Ned knew better than to rush in unannounced. His son was now a commander, a king in everything but crown. He had to come as a soldier, not as a father. They caught up near the twins. The banners of House Stark stretched across the fields like winter mist. Wolves of grey and white flapped in the wind, and in the center of it all stood Robb, sword on his belt, map in hand, surrounded by lords twice his age. Ned watched from the ridge. He hadn't seen his son in months, but Robb looked older now. Not in his face, he still bore the same eyes, the same stubborn mouth, but in his stance, his silence, the way others leaned in when he spoke. When Ned rode into camp, he didn't shout. He didn't announce himself. He simply approached the fire, dismounted, and looked at the boy he once held in his arms. Robb turned. The silence was instant, and then the sword dropped from his hands. "Father," he whispered, as if the wind might blow the vision away. Ned nodded. "Not a ghost. Not yet." Robb rushed forward and embraced him like a boy again, and for a moment the war vanished. But only for a moment. The lords were uneasy. "This changes everything," Rose Bolton said coldly, eyeing Ned as though he might sprout wings. "If Lord Stark lives, then the cause we rallied behind, a son avenging his father, shifts." "No," Ned said. "It doesn't shift." It grows teeth. He unrolled a parchment on the table. "Varys smuggled me out. But before he did, I signed a letter naming Stannis, the true heir. Cersei's children are bastards, born of incest. The Iron Throne is not theirs by right. The lords murmured, but none objected. Ned leaned forward. Stannis sails for King's Landing. Brindley raises men in the Reach. Tywin Lannister rides toward the capital, and Joffrey bleeds the city from within. This is no longer a battle. It's a storm. And in this storm, the North must choose. Robb straightened. We've already chosen. He turned to the lords. We ride to Riverrun to rescue my grandfather. But now we ride with my father at our side. The South thinks he's dead. Let them, we'll use that lie. Let the lions think the wolf sleeps, and then we strike. The tent erupted in cheers. Even the cold-eyed Boltons clapped their hands. But in the back of the tent, grey wind growled. The dire wolf had always sensed things others didn't. He paced in circles around Ned, sniffing the air like something wasn't right. That night as the camp settled, Ned walked alone along the river. He felt something dark stirring, not just war, something deeper. He felt something dark stirring, not just war, something deeper, something older, as if killing Cersei had woken more than just kings and armies. It had woken fire, and fire always demanded blood. They crossed the neck under a moonless sky, moving like phantoms. Word of Ned Stark's death still echoed across the realm, and the North used that lie like a blade. Wherever Lannister scouts roamed, they reported Robb Stark riding with vengeance in his eyes, but no sign of the man whose death had sparked it all. The older lords kept the secret. The younger ones didn't even know. Only a tight circle around Robb knew the truth. Ned Stark lived, and he marched toward vengeance. By the time they reached Riverrun, the banners of war blackened the horizon. Lannister tents littered the valley below like spilled blood. Siege towers ringed the Tully stronghold, and smoke billowed from broken fields where once green things had grown. But the river lords still held the castle. Barely. Ned watched the enemy from a ridge with his son and a dozen commanders. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his mind raced. If we strike from the eastern ridge, he said, pointing toward the river, we cut their supply lines and force them to pull back. Then we hit them again at the fords. Twice in one night? Asked Lord Karstark. That's madness. It's war, Ned replied, and Tywin Lannister plays it without mercy. Robb gave the order without hesitation. Prepare the riders. We break the siege tonight. When darkness fell, the wolves attacked. Robb led the first wave, charging down from the ridge like thunder. Grey wind tore through the night ahead of them, a shadow of death and fury. The Lannisters barely had time to raise alarms before the Stark forces crashed into them like a frozen tide. Fire spread from tents. Men screamed. Horses bucked. Ned rode with the second wave, quiet, lethal, cutting through supply wagons and torching their stores. He fought like he hadn't in years, like the quiet death he'd lived in King's Landing had been burned out of him. He saw Sir Adam Marbrand fall under umber blades. He saw northern men dragging gold wagons into the river. He saw war in its rawest form, chaos and blood and ash. By dawn, the Lannister lines had broken. The siege was lifted, and Riverrun, battered but unbowed, opened its gates. Catelyn Stark stood at the top of the ramparts when Ned rode in, his cloak torn, sword bloodied. She looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face paled, then flushed, then crumpled. She ran to him. The embrace was wordless, desperate, full of months of grief and fury and longing. I buried you, she whispered into his shoulder. I know, he said, holding her tight. But I couldn't stay buried. Inside the castle, the reunion was brief. There were wounded to tend to, supplies to count, and battle plans to redraw. Riverrun's walls had held but barely. The river lords had fought with the desperation of men who knew no help was coming. Now help had come, and with it, something more powerful than numbers, a cause reborn. That night a council was called. Tullys, Umbers, Karstarks, Blackwoods, Brackens, Greatjon, Small John. Even the silent Frey envoys watched with narrowed eyes. Ned stood before them, no longer hidden, no longer pretending to be dead. The South will not save us, he said. They never have. They never will. When I served as Hand of the King, I believed honor could hold the realm together. I was wrong. Cersei proved that. Joffrey proved that. And now the fires of war prove it again. He looked to Robb. "My son fights with your sons. He bleeds beside you, but he cannot lead alone. Not now." Then Ned took a knee. "My sword is yours, Robb, my loyalty, my name. Not as a father, but as a man of the North." Robb looked stunned. "Father, you've earned it," Ned said quietly. The room fell silent. Then one voice rose. "Great John Umbers. We named him king once. I say we do it again, but this time we make it clear." He drew his sword and raised it high, "To the king in the North. Robb Stark, son of the wolf who rose from the grave." The lords echoed the cry one by one, until the walls shook with it. "The king in the North! The king in the North!" And Ned Stark, once the quiet lord of Winterfell, stood in the shadow of his son's crown, and knew that the North was awake. But far to the south a raven landed in King's Landing. It bore no sigil, just 3 words: "The wolf lives." King's Landing had seen storms before. Rebellions, riots, even dragons once, but nothing like this. The message had spread like wildfire through the court. "The wolf lives." At first the small council scoffed. Pycelle claimed it was treasonous misinformation. Littlefinger smiled too thinly and whispered that corpses rarely return. Even Sir Boros of the Kingsguard laughed, until another raven came, then another. First from the Riverlands, then the Vale, then from Old Town itself. All said the same thing in different words. Ned Stark was alive and marching south. Joffrey screamed when he heard. He tore down a Stark banner from the throne room walls and ordered a dozen beggars hanged for treason, though none had even spoken. He ordered Sansa locked away again, this time with no handmaidens, no windows, no mercy. In his madness, he threatened to burn the Sept of Baelor, to show the gods what happens to liars. But the real panic came when word arrived that Stannis had turned back. The Baratheon fleet, once destined for Blackwater Bay, had pulled away in the night. Why, no one knew for certain. Rumors of omens, whispers of the Red Woman's visions. The Lord of Light had spoken, and whatever he said made Stannis choose a different target. Not King's Landing, the North. Cersei would have known what to do if she still lived. She would have spun gold into knives and whispers into death. But she was gone, her skull rotting in a crypt under the Sept, and her absence left the throne room colder than any winter. So they turned to Tywin, the Lion of Casterly Rock. When word reached him of Ned Stark's return, Tywin Lannister stopped his march on the capital and turned west. Straight for Riverrun, straight for Robb. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he knew this wasn't about honor anymore. It was about legacy, and legacy had to be buried with a sword. Meanwhile, at Riverrun, the North was preparing for war the way the South never could. Quietly, purposefully, without parade or pageantry. Ned walked among the men every morning, listening more than speaking. He saw the weariness in their eyes, the steel in their backs. This was no longer a war for a throne. It was a war for survival. Robb sat in the war tent most days now, head bent over maps, learning to lead not with his sword, but with his voice. Ned watched him grow into the man he was always meant to be, not because he wanted the crown, but because he bore its weight without complaint. "You've taught them to follow you," Ned said one night as they stood by the river. "Now you must teach them what comes after victory." Robb frowned. "Is there an after, father?" Ned didn't answer. He wasn't sure. Scouts returned the next day with grim news. Tywin Lannister had split his army. One half marched for Riverrun to meet them head-on. The other half had turned east through the Riverlands, aimed squarely at Harrenhal. But there was worse. Renly Baratheon had taken Highgarden and now controlled the Reach. He marched too, but not toward King's Landing. No, Renly was heading north as well, and with him came hundreds of banners. Bright, soft-colored banners with flowers and suns and smiles. The kind of banners that hid knives beneath silk. Ned gathered his commanders. "We're being boxed in," he said. "The lions from the west, the stag and his roses from the south, and Stannis from the sea with fire at his back. What do we do?" Lord Tully asked, his face lined with worry. Ned laid a dagger on the map. "We do what the south never expects." He pointed toward Harrenhal. "We strike first." The march was brutal. They moved under rain, through broken villages, past ruined fields. The Riverlands had suffered most in this war, burned by both lions and wolves. Ned saw the people hollow-eyed and hungry, and his shame grew. This war, which began with a single sword stroke in the Red Keep, had become a flood. But he couldn't stop it now, only guide it. Harrenhal rose like a corpse from the mists, broken towers, twisted stone. The Lannisters had taken it, but lightly garrisoned it, thinking no northern army would dare swing east with Tywin so close. They were wrong. The assault came at dawn. Grey wind howled before the first arrow flew. Northern spears crashed through the shattered gates. Manderly men flooded the east towers, while the Karstarks took the kitchens and slaughtered the guards like pigs. Ned fought alongside them, his blade a blur, until he reached the central hall. There, waiting in the ruined throne room of Harrenhal, stood Sir Kevan Lannister and Sir Amory Lorch. "We thought you were dead," Kevan said, raising his sword. "So did I," Ned answered and struck. The fight was brutal but short. Kevan was older now, slower. Lorch fell first, then Kevan after a long, bloodied dance. When it was done, Harrenhal was theirs. But it wasn't a victory. It was a message. The wolf was not dead. It was a message. The wolf was not dead. And he wasn't hiding anymore. The flames rose high over Harrenhal that night. Not from battle, but from vengeance. Ned Stark stood atop the broken walls, watching the fires below consume the last Lannister corpses. The northern banners flew high again, snapping like hungry mouths in the wind. Grey wind paced restlessly on the battlements beside Robb, the direwolf's eyes glowing in the flickering light. But peace did not follow. Victory had come at a cost, and the true storm was only just behind them. Scouts arrived breathless with news. Tywin Lannister was less than 2 days away. Renly's host had joined with House Frey, and now marched from the south. And from the east came whispers of glowing sails and flaming swords. Stannis Baratheon had landed, and with him the Red Woman who had once sent assassins to finish Ned in the dark. 3 armies. One battered northern host caught in the center. Ned summoned the War Council, the map between them stained with ash and wine. The lords argued. Some wanted to retreat to the Neck. Others wanted to make a final stand at the Trident. A few, like Roose Bolton, quietly suggested surrender. Ned silenced them with one sentence. "The South wants the North broken, not just beaten." That chilled the room, because they knew it was true. If Tywin took Robb, he'd parade him through the streets in chains. If Renly won, he'd offer pardons, then slowly poison their honor with southern politics. And if Stannis won, he would burn Winterfell to the ground in the name of his god. "We do not win this with numbers," Ned said. "We win with truth." Then he did something no one expected. He took out the parchment. The letter. The one signed in King's Landing, smuggled from the Red Keep before his execution. It named Stannis as the rightful heir and bore the royal seal. "I wrote this to honor the law," he said. "But law and justice are not always the same. Stannis has a claim, but he also has fire and shadow. He will bring death, not peace." He tore the letter in half, then in quarters, then fed it to the fire. Robb stood. "Then what do we do?" Ned turned to him. "We crown the truth." That dawn, before the walls of Harrenhal, under a sky bruised with coming storm, Eddard Stark bent the knee to his son once more. But this time, with all the northern and river lords watching. "I lived so the north could rise," Ned said, loud enough for the wind to carry. "And now I call on every man of honor to rise with it. Not for King's Landing, not for iron chairs, but for freedom." And one by one the lords knelt. A second coronation, but this time not in grief, this time in defiance. By nightfall the trap was set. Ned had no illusions. They couldn't defeat all 3 armies, so instead he gave them what they wanted, each other. He sent ravens to Tywin, to Stannis, and to Renly, all signed with the same hand. "Come claim the North. Come fight for the Ashes. We will be waiting at the Trident." But when the armies arrived, they did not find the Starks waiting. They found each other. Confused scouts, misdirection, misinformation. Enough to make Renly and Tywin clash over who would take Harrenhal first. Enough for Stannis, ever righteous, to declare both of them traitors to the rightful king. The 3 southern forces turned on each other like starving dogs. And the north, they vanished into the mist, retreated beyond the Twins, beyond the Neck, into the safety of the frozen lands that only northerners knew. By the time the smoke cleared and thousands lay dead at the Trident, the North was gone, vanished, whole, waiting. Back at Winterfell, the snows began to fall. Ned walked the Godswood alone, the weirwood's face watching him as it had since boyhood. He knew this wasn't over. The realm still believed him dead. The war still burned, but he had something now he didn't before. Time to build, to gather, to teach Robb what came after victory. Time to prepare the North for what it had always been meant to do, stand alone. The Game of Thrones had tried to bury the wolf, but the wolf had dug himself out, and now he was watching, waiting, because winter wasn't coming anymore. It was already here.